First of all, I would like to thank Coach Flood, my family and friends for my opportunity to be back on this team. I'm relieved that the case is behind me and it's dismissed, and I'm just happy to be back out here with my teammates and ready to go.
How excited were you just to go through that first practice and get back to the
Very excited. I think what made me the most happy is the comfort from my teammates. As soon as I got back in the locker room, they were going crazy. They were happy. Showing me nothing but support out here on the field today. Making sure I lined up correctly and little things like that. But it was just a blessing to be back out here and just to be back out here with them.
Any rust? Were you rusty at all?
No, I don't think so. I felt pretty good. I felt pretty comfortable out here. Some of my coaches said it looks like I didn't lose a step. So,
what'd you do to keep yourself prepared or in shape?
I worked out.
By yourself, or?
Yeah, I just worked out, with my friends, and made sure I stayed in shape.
How much film did you watch? Just future opponents, and how much of these Rutgers games that you missed did you watch? How many times?
All of them. I had my iPad with me at home, so I was able to just go on my iPad anytime I want and just turn on the game and make sure I made sure mentally I stayed up to par with the team.
Leonte, do you have anything to say to the people who might have been bashing you during this process, or throwing you under the bus, media or otherwise?
No, not at all. My family and my coaches know what type of character I have. They know who I am as a person, and for them, me being back on the team and knowing what type of guy I am, me just being back out here is made them happy, and that's what's most important.
Leonte, we've seen the video your lawyers released, and we've seen various media reports from eyewitness accounts. Can you tell us what you were thinking that night, what actually happened?
Respectfully, I don't want to get into details of what happened that night. I'm just happy it's behind me, and I'm happy I'm back out with my teammates.
Do you have any regrets of just about everything that happened that night?
Like I said, I really don't want to get into details of what happened. I'm just blessed to be back out here, and I just can't wait to, just go out there and play Saturday.
How do you go about leading now? I mean, you obviously had this incident, and then you had the curfew violation. How do you go about leading?
The biggest thing for me is to make sure that my teammates knows what type of guy I am. They already know, but that doesn't mean I wasn't in their ear every day that I was out. I was watching practice. I was texting the receivers, coaching them up. I was motivating guys before the game, calls at night while they were in the hotel, talking to them nonstop. So, even though I wasn't here physically, they still heard me every single day.
What was it like the last couple of weeks to be forced to be away?
It hurt. This is the game that I love, that I've been playing since I was a little kid, and me just not being here with my teammates is what hurt me the most. Just not being out here for them, and being here for them hurt me the most. And I'm just happy to be back.
I don't want to imply anything, but the curfew violation, you came out, you owned it, you said, no, mistake will never happen again. Do you feel the same way about this? Or, I guess, how do you, after saying that about the first one, how do you juxtapose this?
This situation was an unfortunate event. It's something that I'm not going to really get into. The people that know me and was there from day one knows what happened. So, everybody who has judged me on my character really doesn't know the story, but my coaches and my teammates and my family knows what happened. So that's what's important.
Leonte, will we eventually hear that story, and kind of what was your thought process during the course of this? Did you feel like this was something where you were going to get back on the field, or were thoughts running through your head that you may never play for Rutgers again?
No, I knew I was going to play again. Just the type of character I have, and me knowing this event and how unfortunate it was, I just knew I had to be patient and just wait. But Coach Flood's a great guy, and I knew one day I was going to be back on his team. I just, like I said, had to stay patient, and unfortunately the legal process is slow, and I'm just happy to be back out here.
Two more questions.
What were the conditions of the reinstatement?
I really don't want to get into that. Coach Flood, he knows the conditions. My athletic director knows the conditions. And I'm going to take those conditions seriously, and to make sure that they're well in effect, and I'm going to use an opportunity to get better from them.
Obviously, you have a season to finish, but even the judge said you're going to be playing football on Sundays. Domestic violence, very serious in the NFL. What is your kind of reaction to having that, even with charges dropped attached to your name? I'm
just hoping that the NFL scouts and coaches, they know what type of character I have. They can speak to, you know, my elementary school teacher, middle school teacher. You know, I've been a really good kid growing up. You know, they could talk to my family and friends. You know, those people know what type of character I have. Since I've been out, you know, Facebook, any type of social media, people have been making comments and really supporting me. So they know, you know, what type of guy I am, and hopefully the NFL scouts will know too.
Thanks, I understand how lucky you are. You know, when I was in court, the judge was, you know, talking. Do you understand what he was saying by all that stuff? And
yes, definitely. You know, this was a very serious matter, and you know, I don't take any of this for granted, and I'm just blessed to be back out here. You know, after speaking with my family and friends and teammates, you know, I understand this is a blessing, and I am very lucky and fortunate. But like I said, this was a very unfortunate event. So, you know, for me to be back out here practicing today, you know, being able to play in the 8-game stretch, I'm very excited about.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.